You need to add some text for me to talk. I need to document exactly how a forced family reconciliation dinner over a commercial real estate trust ended with multiple felony arrests, a shattered dining room, and the complete financial dismantling of my immediate family. To understand the sheer scale of the legal and financial catastrophe that my parents brought upon themselves, I have to explain the architecture of the abuse that led up to it. I am a 29-year-old logistics systems architect. My brother, Aaron, is 34. For as long as I can remember, the dynamic in our household was rigorously strictly defined. Aaron was the golden child, an aspiring entrepreneur who was perpetually on the verge of a massive breakthrough that never materialized. I was the reliable, invisible baseline. My parents, who are now 61 and 59, spent their entire adult lives functioning as Aaron's personal public relations firm and financial backstops. The abuse from Aaron was never just the standard sibling friction. It was systematic, calculated, and highly destructive. When I was 19 and working 2 jobs to pay for university tuition, Aaron stole my debit card and drained $1,800 from my checking account to cover a lease down payment on a luxury vehicle he could not afford. When I confronted him, he physically assaulted me, resulting in a fractured rib. My parents' response was to write me a personal check for the stolen funds out of their own home equity line of credit, followed by my mother sobbing and demanding that I not report the theft to the bank or the police because a criminal record would ruin Aaron's bright future. I accepted the check because I needed to pay my tuition, but that was the foundational moment I realized my physical safety and financial security would always be sacrificed to protect my brother's reputation. The final breaking point before my complete estrangement from the family occurred exactly 26 months ago. We were attending our maternal aunt's funeral reception. Aaron, who had recently filed for bankruptcy after his third failed e-commerce venture, cornered me near a stairwell and demanded a personal loan of $25,000. When I firmly declined and attempted to walk away, he shoved me from behind. I fell down a flight of solid oak stairs, fracturing my left clavicle and suffering a severe concussion. My out-of-pocket medical expenses, even with premium health insurance, totaled over $12,400. My parents immediately launched a campaign of aggressive gaslighting. They informed the rest of the extended family that I had tripped over my own feet because I had been drinking, which was completely false as I was the designated driver for the evening. They refused to reimburse my medical bills, stating that holding on to anger over an accident was poisoning my spirit. The very next morning, I sent a certified cease and desist letter drafted by a local attorney to my parents and brother, officially establishing a zero-contact boundary. I blocked their numbers, restricted their access to my social media, and moved to a gated apartment complex in a different municipality. For over 2 years, I enjoyed absolute peace, focusing entirely on my career and building my own substantial investment portfolio. The silence was broken 6 weeks ago when I received a thick, certified legal packet at my residential address. The sender was my father. The documentation inside pertained to a family trust that had been established by my late paternal grandfather. The trust contained a single, highly valuable asset, a commercial property located in a rapidly developing suburban corridor, currently operating under a triple net lease to a regional pharmacy chain. The property had recently been appraised at $1.85 million and generated roughly $9,000 in monthly revenue, which was held in a maintenance and tax escrow account managed by my parents as the primary trustees. I was a legally designated 33% beneficiary of this trust. My father's accompanying letter stated that the pharmacy chain was attempting to break their lease early due to corporate restructuring. He claimed that the property taxes, which amounted to $22,000 annually, were coming due, and the trust lacked the liquidity to cover them without the tenant's consistent rent. The letter insisted that a mandatory in-person beneficiary meeting was required at their primary residence to authorize a refinancing agreement against the property's equity to float the tax burden and fund structural renovations to attract a new commercial tenant. I was immediately suspicious. I reviewed the trust documents with a corporate attorney I kept on retainer for my own consulting business. My attorney noted that, while the trustees had the power to manage the property, encumbering the asset with a new commercial mortgage required the notarized consent of all named beneficiaries. My father could not legally borrow against the building without my physical signature. My attorney advised me that I had a fiduciary right to review the trust's financial ledgers before signing anything. I sent a brief, formal email to my father's business account, stating that I would agree to a strictly professional meeting at their home on the following Tuesday evening, solely to review the tax documents and the proposed refinancing terms. I explicitly stated that, if Aaron was present, I would immediately terminate the meeting and leave. My father replied within 10 minutes, giving me his solemn word that Aaron was out of state on a business trip and that this would be a brief, procedural meeting just between the three of us. I prepared meticulously. I packed a heavy leather briefcase with copies of the original trust documents, a digital voice recorder, and my $2,400 work laptop to take contemporaneous notes. Because I am a resident of a single-party consent state regarding audio recording, I activated the recording application on my smartphone the moment I parked my vehicle on their street. I slipped the phone securely into the interior breast pocket of my suit jacket. I also wore a high-end smartwatch that featured a discrete emergency SOS function, which could be triggered by holding the side button for 5 continuous seconds. When I arrived at their 4-bedroom colonial home, I immediately noticed my father's vehicle in the driveway, alongside a rented sedan. My father opened the front door, offering a tight, anxious smile. He ushered me into the foyer, aggressively locking the deadbolt behind me. I walked straight past him into the formal dining room, intending to set up my laptop and get straight to the financial documents. Sitting at the head of the heavy mahogany dining table was Aaron. He was nursing a glass of bourbon, looking disheveled and deeply agitated. My mother was sitting adjacent to him, wringing her hands nervously. I immediately stopped in the archway of the dining room. I turned to my father, who had followed me, and stated clearly that he had violated the explicit terms of this meeting and that I was leaving immediately. I attempted to walk back toward the foyer, but my father stepped directly into my path, physically blocking the hallway. He raised his hands, adopting a patronizing tone, and informed me that this was actually a family mediation session. He stated that the property refinancing was a secondary issue and that the primary goal of the evening was to heal our fractured family dynamic. My mother began to weep loudly from the dining table. She told me that family is a permanent bond and that my refusal to forgive Aaron was actively destroying her cardiovascular health. She claimed that the entire estrangement was based on my unreasonable grudge over a few broken bones and some misunderstood financial loans from years ago. I kept my posture rigid, refusing to engage with her emotional manipulation, and reiterated to my father that I required him to step aside so I could exit the premises. My father refused to move, bracing his shoulders against the doorframe. Aaron then stood up from the table, slamming his glass down so hard that the liquid splashed onto the wood. He told our parents to stop babying me and declared that it was time to get down to business. Aaron reached into a manila envelope on the table and tossed a thick stack of stapled documents toward my side of the table. Aaron explained with an arrogant smirk that his most recent limited liability company was facing a catastrophic default judgment of $150,000 from a group of private investors. He stated that he was facing potential criminal fraud charges if he could not make the investors whole by the end of the month. He then laid out his demand. The documents he had thrown on the table were not refinancing agreements for the trust. They were a notarized waiver and a quitclaim deed. He demanded that I sign over my entire 33% beneficiary stake in the commercial property to him. He explained that with a 66% majority stake, he could bypass the standard trust restrictions and leverage the property for a massive high-interest bridge loan to pay off his investors and fund a new startup venture. I stared at him, genuinely stunned by the sheer audacity and legal absurdity of his demand. I informed him that I would absolutely not be signing over nearly $500,000 of my own future equity to bail him out of his fraudulent business dealings. I told him his financial incompetence was not my liability. The atmosphere in the room instantly turned toxic. Aaron's face flushed dark red. He began screaming, stating that I was a selfish parasite who had never contributed anything to the family legacy. He claimed that because our parents had invested so much money into my university education, I legally owed them my share of the trust as repayment, and they were choosing to redirect that repayment to him. I calmly clarified that my university tuition had been paid entirely through academic scholarships and my own labor, aside from the $1,800 he had personally stolen from me. At that exact moment, my mother stood up and screamed at me to stop living in the past. She begged me to just sign the documents, stating that if Aaron went to prison, it would kill her, and my refusal to sign would make me personally responsible for her death. I realized the situation was rapidly devolving from a financial ambush into a dangerous psychological trap. I picked up my briefcase by the handle, turned my back on Aaron, and took a firm step toward my father, commanding him to move out of the doorway immediately, or I would consider his actions false imprisonment. My father did not flinch. Instead, he reached out and shoved me backward by my shoulders, pushing me back into the dining room. He told me that nobody was leaving the house until the paperwork was executed and notarized. He claimed they had a mobile notary waiting on standby down the street, ready to come over the moment I provided my signature. Before I could recover my balance from my father's shove, Aaron closed the distance between us. He grabbed a heavy, lead crystal water pitcher from the center of the dining table and hurled it directly at my head. I ducked instinctively. The pitcher shattered against the wall behind me, sending shards of thick glass exploding across the room. One large piece struck my leather briefcase, gouging the material, and water soaked the floorboards. Aaron then lunged at me. He grabbed the lapels of my suit jacket, twisted the fabric to choke off my air supply, and slammed my back brutally against the wooden wainscoting of the dining room wall. The impact knocked the wind out of me and sent a sharp, agonizing pain up my spine. He pinned me against the wall, his face inches from mine, screaming that he was going to beat the signature out of me if he had to break every finger on my right hand to do it. As he drew his fist back to strike my face, I reached my left hand across my body and clamped my fingers down on the side button of my smartwatch. I squeezed it with everything I had, holding it for the required 5 seconds. I felt the 3 distinct haptic vibrations against my wrist, confirming that the emergency SOS sequence had initiated. A silent, open mic line was now connected to the County 911 Dispatch Center, broadcasting and recording the live audio of the assault, along with my exact GPS coordinates. I did not fight back aggressively, knowing that any offensive strike on my part could be weaponized against me later by my parents. Instead, I focused entirely on defensive blocking and verbal documentation. I shouted clearly and loudly, demanding that Aaron remove his hands from my throat and stating that I was being assaulted. I yelled directly at my father, demanding that he call the police immediately. My father's response was chilling. He stepped fully into the dining room, walked past the shattered glass, and told Aaron to check my pockets for my phone so I couldn't record anything. My mother was standing in the corner covering her ears, doing absolutely nothing to intervene as her eldest son actively choked her youngest. Aaron released my throat with one hand and reached into my jacket, attempting to locate my device. In his frantic searching, he lost his balance slightly on the water-slicked floor. I used the opportunity to drive my knee upward into his thigh, breaking his grapple, and pushed him away with both hands. Aaron stumbled backward and fell hard against the edge of the mahogany table. As he fell, his forearm dragged across a jagged piece of the shattered crystal pitcher that was resting on the table runner, creating a long, bleeding laceration on his arm. Aaron shrieked in pain, clutching his bleeding arm. He looked at the blood on his hands and completely lost his mind. He picked up a wooden dining chair and hurled it across the room. It smashed into a display cabinet, sending antique china crashing to the floor. My mother finally began screaming in terror, not for me, but over the destruction of her dining room. My father yelled at me, stating that, look what I had made my brother do, blaming me for the destruction of their property because I was being stubborn about a simple piece of paper. I retreated to the far corner of the room, keeping the heavy dining table between myself and my brother, breathing heavily and waiting. I knew the dispatchers were listening. I knew the GPS was tracking. 12 agonizing minutes later, the flashing red and blue lights of multiple patrol cruisers illuminated the front windows of the house. The heavy pounding on the front door was immediate, followed by a commanding voice announcing the county sheriff's department. The immediate narrative shift executed by my family was genuinely terrifying to witness. The moment the police announced themselves, Aaron dropped to his knees, clutching his bleeding arm and beginning to hyperventilate dramatically. My mother rushed to his side, tearing a cloth napkin to apply pressure to his self-inflicted wound. My father sprinted to the front door and threw it open. 4 uniformed officers entered the house rapidly, hands resting on their utility belts, scanning the chaotic scene. The dining room was destroyed. Shattered crystal, broken china, an overturned chair, and water pooled on the hardwood. Aaron was bleeding on the floor, and I was standing in the corner, my suit torn, breathing heavily. Before the officers could even issue a command, my father pointed directly at me. He informed the primary officer that I was suffering from a severe manic episode. He lied effortlessly, stating that I had arrived at their home uninvited, demanded money from my brother, and when they refused, I had completely lost my mind and begun destroying their dining room. My mother chimed in, tears streaming down her face, confirming my father's fabricated story. She told the officers that I had thrown the crystal pitcher at my brother, and when Aaron tried to calm me down, I had attacked him with a piece of broken glass, which caused the deep laceration on his arm. Aaron played his part perfectly, looking up at the officers with wide, panicked eyes, stating that he just wanted me to get psychiatric help and that he was terrified for his life. The primary officer drew his taser and aimed the laser directly at my chest, ordering me to place my hands on my head and step away from the table. 2 other officers flanked me rapidly. They grabbed my arms, forced me to face the wall, and secured my wrists in steel handcuffs. They patted me down, retrieving my smartphone from my breast pocket and placing it on the table. As I was being handcuffed, my father stepped forward, adopting a tone of deep parental concern. He told the officers that they didn't want to press criminal charges because I was clearly unwell, and they just wanted me transported to a psychiatric facility for an involuntary psychiatric hold. He knew exactly what he was doing. An involuntary hold would discredit me entirely, render any claims of abuse null and void, and give them time to manipulate the situation further while I was locked in a medical facility. I remained completely silent during the physical restraint process. I did not resist, I did not argue, and I did not panic. Once I was secured and the officer asked for my identification, I spoke in a calm, measured, and highly professional tone. I informed the primary officer that my name was Mark, that I had no history of psychiatric illness, and that I was the victim of an organized assault and attempted extortion. I clearly stated that I had a laceration on the back of my head from being slammed into the wall and requested immediate medical attention for a suspected concussion. Then I looked directly at the lead officer and told him that my smartphone, which was currently sitting on the table, had been actively recording audio for the last 45 minutes. I further informed him that my smartwatch had dialed 911 12 minutes ago, and that county dispatch had an open mic recording of the entire physical altercation, including my father attempting to confiscate my phone to prevent documentation, and my brother threatening to beat a legal signature out of me. The color instantly drained from my father's face. He lunged toward the dining table to grab my phone, but a secondary officer intercepted him, shoving him back aggressively and ordering him to stand down. The primary officer radioed dispatch to confirm my statement regarding the open emergency line. The radio crackled, and dispatch confirmed that they had a continuous audio feed from my device logging the entire domestic disturbance, noting specifically that they heard a male voice demanding a signature followed by the sounds of a physical struggle and glass breaking well before the suspect sustained the laceration. The atmosphere in the room shifted with the force of a tectonic plate. The officers immediately separated everyone. I was escorted outside to a waiting ambulance to be evaluated by paramedics. My parents and brother were confined to separate areas of the house for individual questioning. The paramedics documented a deep contusion on my spine, severe bruising around my collarbone from where Aaron had grabbed me, and a small laceration on the back of my scalp. My blood pressure was dangerously high, and they recommended immediate transport to the emergency room for a full trauma evaluation. I agreed. Before the ambulance departed, a senior detective who had arrived on the scene approached the back doors. He informed me that they had secured my smartphone into evidence and had requested a preliminary playback of the dispatch audio. He stated that the audio explicitly contradicted every statement my parents and brother had provided. I spent the next 6 hours in the emergency department. I underwent a CT scan to rule out internal bleeding, received 9 stitches in the back of my head, and was diagnosed with a moderate concussion and soft tissue damage to my cervical spine. The total hospital bill, which I immediately requested an itemized receipt for, was $3,800. While I was in the hospital, the situation at the house escalated into a full-blown criminal event. Based on the overwhelming audio evidence and the physical layout of the scene, the police determined exactly what had happened. Aaron was placed under arrest at the scene. He was charged with felony aggravated assault, felony attempted extortion, and false imprisonment. Because he had outstanding warrants related to his fraudulent business activities that the background check immediately flagged, his bail was set at a staggering $250,000. My parents were not spared. Because they had willfully, intentionally, and concertedly lied to multiple responding officers in an attempt to have me falsely arrested and involuntarily committed, the detective placed both of them in handcuffs. They were arrested for filing a false police report, conspiracy to commit extortion, and accessory to assault. I was discharged from the hospital at 4 in the morning. I took a rideshare directly to my apartment, locked every door, and slept for 14 hours. When I woke up, the real work began. I did not just want to survive this incident, I wanted to dismantle the entire system that had allowed this abuse to flourish for decades. The following Monday, I engaged the services of 2 highly specialized professionals. First, I retained a criminal victims' rights advocate to act as an aggressive liaison between myself and the district attorney's office, ensuring that no plea deals would be offered to my family without my explicit consent. Second, I paid a $10,000 retainer to a senior partner at a ruthless civil litigation firm that specialized in trust disputes and fiduciary negligence. I provided my civil attorney with copies of the trust documents, my medical records, the police report numbers, and a detailed chronological history of my parents' financial enabling of Aaron. My attorney immediately filed an emergency ex parte motion in probate court, arguing that my parents had breached their fiduciary duties and engaged in criminal conspiracy against a named beneficiary. The probate judge granted the emergency motion. My parents were immediately suspended as trustees, and their access to the trust's escrow and operating accounts was frozen. The court appointed an independent forensic accounting firm to conduct a comprehensive audit of the trust's finances over the past 7 years. The audit process took 3 months, and the discoveries were catastrophic for my parents. The forensic accountants uncovered that the commercial property was not actually struggling with property taxes. The pharmacy tenant had never threatened to break the lease. They had been paying their $9,000 monthly rent consistently, on time via direct wire transfer. The massive financial deficit was entirely manufactured by my parents. The audit proved that over a 4-year period, my parents had systematically embezzled over $85,000 from the trust's maintenance fund. They had laundered this money through a series of shell LLCs directly into Aaron's failing business ventures. When Aaron's massive $150,000 default judgment hit, the maintenance fund was empty. My parents could not bail him out with cash, so they devised a plan to force me to sign over my equity so they could mortgage the commercial property itself. The legal fallout was absolute and devastating. In the criminal court, the district attorney presented my parents with a brutal reality. They were facing significant prison time for the extortion conspiracy. The DA offered them a conditional plea arrangement. If they pled guilty to the false police report charges and agreed to testify as hostile witnesses against Aaron regarding the extortion plot, they would receive suspended sentences and 5 years of heavily monitored probation. If they refused, the DA would pursue the maximum penalty for the felony conspiracy charges. Faced with the prospect of spending their retirement in a state penitentiary, my parents finally broke. Their loyalty to their golden child evaporated when their own freedom was on the line. They accepted the plea deal. They stood in open court, under oath, and testified that Aaron had planned the ambush, drafted the fraudulent quitclaim deed, and threatened to physically harm me if I did not sign it. They admitted to lying to the police to protect him. Aaron's defense completely collapsed. Without our parents covering for him and facing the unassailable audio evidence from my smartwatch, his public defender advised him to take a blind plea. The judge showed zero leniency for his history of violence and financial predation. Aaron was convicted of felony aggravated assault and attempted extortion. He was sentenced to 4 years in the state penitentiary, with a mandatory requirement to serve at least 80% of his time before parole eligibility. My parents avoided prison, but their lives were completely destroyed. As a condition of their probation, they were required to complete 200 hours of community service and submit to regular psychological evaluations. But the civil court proceedings were where the true execution took place. Based on the forensic audit proving massive embezzlement and fiduciary fraud, the probate judge permanently removed my parents as trustees. The judge ruled that they had fundamentally violated the prudent investor rule and the Uniform Trust Code. An independent fiduciary was appointed to liquidate the trust entirely. The commercial property was listed by a premier commercial brokerage and sold within 45 days for $1.92 million. The distribution of the funds was handled with clinical, punitive precision by the court. The $85,000 that my parents had embezzled to fund Aaron's lifestyle was directly subtracted from their portion of the settlement and added to my share to make me whole. Furthermore, the judge ordered that the entirety of my civil legal fees, which had ballooned to over $42,000 during the exhaustive auditing process, were to be paid out of my parents' remaining equity before any funds were disbursed to them. Aaron's beneficiary status was completely nullified due to his felony conviction related to extorting the trust asset. After capital gains taxes, the repayment of the embezzled funds, and the legal fee deductions, I received a final lump sum wire transfer of $585,000. My parents received a fraction of what they anticipated, the majority of which immediately went to paying off their own massive criminal defense legal bills, which exceeded $90,000. They were forced to sell the 4-bedroom colonial house where the assault took place just to avoid bankruptcy, downsizing to a small 2-bedroom apartment in a less desirable municipality. I took my settlement and used it to purchase a large, modern property in a high-security community 3 states away, expanding my consulting business and securing my financial independence for the rest of my life. I was granted permanent, lifetime orders of protection against all 3 of them. If Aaron, my mother, or my father ever attempts to contact me, approach my residence, or communicate with me through a third party, they will be immediately arrested for violating a court order, which would trigger a probation violation for my parents and send them directly to prison. I have not spoken a single word to any of them since the night the police escorted me out of their shattered dining room. They sacrificed their wealth, their home, their freedom, and their relationship with their only stable son, all in a desperate criminal attempt to protect an abusive parasite. I built my life on documentation, boundaries, and the law, and in the end, those systems protected me perfectly.